For today's main program, I'm pleased to bring to the podium Mary Kipp, the CEO of Puget Sound Energy. I first learned about Mary from a story in the Seattle Times back in July of 2019, when it was announced that Kimberly Harris, who had run the Bellevue-based utility and its Puget Sound Energy parent for nearly a decade, she would be stepping down in January of 2020 and passing the torch to Mary. As the Seattle Times put it back then, an all too rare women CEO to woman CEO transition. Mary joined PSE from El Paso Electric, where she served as Chief Executive Officer since 2015 and President since 2014. Under her leadership, EPE, also a 100+ year company with deeply rooted community history, evolved to serve a diverse customer base spread across Mountain West region and growing border communities. With EPE since 2007, Mary held a variety of leadership roles throughout the company, including general counsel, regulatory and rates, risk management, human resources, external affairs, customer care, environmental and safety. Prior to joining EPE, Mary was a prosecuting attorney for FERC for 4 years, investigating and prosecuting violations of federal energy laws. Mary, I'm pleased to welcome you to the podium today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So thank you, Rotarians, and also the event organizers. And I would echo the Happy New Year as well. One of the many gifts that the Pacific Northwest has given to me since I've been here is beginning to understand some other cultures that I previously hadn't had a lot of exposure to. And my son attends the Northwest School, which has a boarding program comprised of many Asian students. And so Lunar New Year is a big part of the culture there. And it's been one of the many things that I've been really excited to learn about since I've been here. So I've been here about a year and a half. And I've been in the CEO seat just over a year now. I celebrated my 1-year anniversary last month on January 2nd. And I don't think I even have to go in detail on what a year it was to start a new job. Just 2 months into it, we're faced with both the pandemic and the economic crisis that, has been a driving force behind just about everything in our lives since then. I've had people ask me if knowing what I know now, would I have still come here? And the resounding answer is yes. So the story of how I came here is pretty simple. I was very, very happy in El Paso. I was working on what I thought were some pretty significant border issues, both separate from my job and then some climate related and energy issues directly as part of my job. And I'd had a couple of recruiters call me, and I'd had one call me a few times, and I'd always said, no, not interested, really happy here, love the border. And this time he called and he said, Mary, you're not going to be able to tell me no this time, because all the reasons that you've ever given me in the past and, what it would take, what kind of the secret sauce of getting you to move would be, it's here in this one. And specifically, it was a region of the country that I really, really love and that really resonates with me. And the second part was really to be able to go somewhere where I could make a difference when it came to climate change. And so that's what brought me here. And when I got here, I told the board and I told my fellow employees I have 2 primary objectives, and the one is working to combat climate change. I have a lot of admiration for the Clean Energy Transition Act, which is the law here in Washington, and I want to do my part to help us try to attain that and thereby be a model for other places. And then also working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those were kind of the 2 big things I wanted to talk about when I got here, and I found a really willing audience. But before we talk about that a little bit more, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about PSE. We are the state's oldest utility with roots going back to 1873. And we are the local energy provider for neighborhoods and communities across Washington state. As the state's largest utility, we are proud to keep the lights and the heat on for about 1.5 million customers. 1.1 million electric customers and 900,000 natural gas customers. I know the math doesn't add up there, and that is because some of them are overlapping. In Seattle, we only serve gas customers. Seattle City Light does a terrific job of providing electric energy to our gas customers, and we serve about 150,000. And one of the things that was really interesting for me coming up here, coming from the desert Southwest, where we have a summer peak based on air conditioning, is that we still have a winter peak here. And even Portland has moved to what we call a dual peak, having a summer and a winter peak. But Seattle, at least for the time being, remains a winter peaking area. And so on the coldest days in winter, some of which we've been experiencing recently, natural gas provides about 2/3 of the energy to the city of Seattle. And we have about 3,100 employees. They largely live and work in the communities we serve. And so this is our home, and we are deeply committed to its current and future success. So if we talk a little bit about the COVID crisis, no talk would be complete right now without addressing it a little bit. And like many of your companies, we sent people home early. And we actually sent all of our employees who could work from home, our office-based employees, we sent them home on March 4th. And that was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make as a CEO. I obviously consulted my executive management team on that, and they're terrific. And we really talked it through and decided it was the right thing to do. Part of what gave me comfort in that decision was we're very fortunate here in Seattle to have some, globally significant companies. And in particular, through our membership in Challenge Seattle, we had heard from the likes of Starbucks and Microsoft and what they had seen in China and in Italy in terms of the coronavirus. And that gave me some certainty that this really was a very serious thing we were facing, and that we needed to get those employees who we could home, one, so that they wouldn't take up hospital space, but two, so that they wouldn't be interacting with our field employees and thereby exposing them. I remember at the time thinking, I'm a new CEO sitting here. People don't really know me yet. They're going to think, here came this crazy person from Texas who's overreacting. But I remember thinking, one of our key values is safety, and I'd rather be known as the person who overreacted than the person who didn't know what was necessary to maintain safety. And actually, over time, we became a model for utilities nationally. And I'm very, very proud of our team for that. And then, of course, our customers and our communities have also struggled during the coronavirus, as all of us know, financially, mental health issues. There have been just so many things that have come out of this. We took early action to help how we could. Even before there was a state mandate to do so, we made the decision not to disconnect any customers. We also worked with the Washington Utility and Transportation Commission to make sure that our customers won't pay interest or late fees once this crisis had passed. And also with the WUTC, we were able to make $11 million in energy assistance funds available to customers impacted by the coronavirus. And as of this week, we have approved the applications of more than 15,000 customers and distributed nearly $9 million. And I am really, really proud of that. I can't even emphasize enough the efforts it took, ranging from IT to our government affairs to our rates and regulatory folks, to really make this happen. And I'm very grateful that we're able to do it. And then, of course, like so many of you, we found ways through the PSC Foundation and the employees ourselves to donate money. And at this point, we've given more than $4.2 million to help our communities impacted by COVID. So I talked in the opening about, deep decarbonization is really what I came here to do. And that is what intrigued me about the challenge of this particular job. And in the midst of COVID-19, we didn't lose sight of this. Sometimes we had to focus on other things in the immediate term, but we always kept this at least on kind of the middle burner, because as all of you know, there's really not time to delay this. And so I see climate change, just like COVID-19, and I've talked about this often, as it's bigger than ourselves, and it's an urgent issue of our time. A few years ago, I was speaking to an energy group in Los Angeles, and I actually talked about it being an existential threat. And at that time, that made a lot of news because I was a utility CEO talking about climate change being an existential threat. And I'm really happy to say that now I think the world has evolved so that that's not a newsworthy event, that all of us in the utility industry, or at least the vast majority of us, are recognizing that anthropogenic climate change is really, really critical and that we need to do something about it. So we began the work of figuring out how we were going to comply with CETA, but also what we could do to go beyond that. And so we began the hard work of thinking about what's realistic for us, what is aspirational for us, what should we be doing to be our customers' clean energy provider of choice. And so very recently, we have announced a goal, in part aspirational and in part a promise, that we will be a beyond net zero carbon company by 2045. And this is tricky because we have, as I mentioned earlier, natural gas distribution as well as an electric utility. We're what's known as a dual utility. And we're going to do this in a few ways. So first, we're going to target reducing our own carbon emissions to net zero, and then go beyond that by helping other sectors, such as transportation, which is actually a huge contributor in Washington State, to enable carbon reduction across Washington State. And so by doing this, we hope that the energy we're providing doesn't just slow climate change, but help reverse it. And so how specifically are we going to do that? Well, we do have a white paper on it, which I suggest all of you read, but I promise not to go into excruciating detail in this brief talk today. But the first bucket is we plan to reduce emissions from our own electric and gas operations and our electric supply to net zero by 2030. Second, we are aiming for net zero emissions for natural gas sales by 2045, and this is specifically customer use in homes and businesses. And it wouldn't be a true goal if we didn't have an interim target as well. So the interim target there is 30% in emissions by 2030. And when we talk about our natural gas business, it's really a shorthand way or a traditional way of talking about what I call our pipes and our people. Just as years ago, our electric lines carried a lot of coal-fired power across them, and now are carrying increasingly more renewable power and zero carbon power. So our natural gas system, I believe, will evolve to carry cleaner energy. We're already having some RNG or renewable natural gas flow through the system, and we're increasingly seeing success with hydrogen. So my hope is that through this, we will be partnering with others because we don't know everything, and that's very hard for us to admit as a utility, but actually convening groups of people, not only representing different stakeholder interests, but also with technical expertise to allow us to see how we can get there. We have a lot of what are called resource adequacy issues here in Washington State, which means there simply isn't enough energy for our growing needs. And so my view is rather than abandon this pipe infrastructure that we have, let's find a way to allow it to be part of the clean energy solution. It's an audacious goal. I can't promise we'll succeed at it, but it's certainly something that I think we need to try to do. The third bucket is to go beyond our own emissions and reduce emissions in other sectors. And here we'll be partnering with customers and industry and looking at programs and products to enable a decarbonized region. So we'll be advocating for cost-effective solutions to reduce carbon statewide. And as I said, we set this goal knowing we don't have all the answers for now, but given the extent of our climate crisis and the fact that it's probably the most important issue of our time, that and combating systemic racism, I just want to make sure that we take a leadership role and put our stake in the ground. And obviously, if we succeed, that's not enough. We have to be something that can be modeled elsewhere, because as we all know, carbon is a global pollutant. And so my hope is that we can do the work here in Washington State that others can emulate. So wish me luck. And if any of you are interested in participating, we would love to hear about it. Because like I said, a key part of our strategy is partnership with our customers, our communities, and equally importantly, with our regulators and our policymakers. I am by training a regulatory lawyer. So I say this with some self-criticism in mind as well, but many of the constructs that have developed over the last 100 or so years to regulate utilities didn't take into account our need for clean energy and the need for transformation that's happening. It was really based on what is the lowest cost, what is reliable, that type of thing. So we have some very brave regulators and policymakers in this state, I think, who are going to be partnering with us and other stakeholders, including those in the environmental community, those representing traditionally marginalized communities, to really help us drive a change. And so I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm really hoping that we can approach this, if not with an environment of total trust, at least an environment of knowing that we may need to put aside some of our historic prejudices and differences and assumptions just to really try to solve this thing, because as I said, it's bigger than all of us. I also mentioned earlier that diversity, equity, and inclusion are something that is really important to me. I grew up in southwestern New Mexico, which is a largely Latino area. I think probably the racial and ethnic makeup is probably about 87 to 90% Mexican American, and then the remaining being made up of other races. So I grew up in an environment where I thought I experienced a lot of diversity, and I experienced things in some different ways than I think people do who have typically been in white dominated areas. And so this is something that I really hope to make a difference of here as well. And I know my team feels really strongly about it. I had no idea when I announced this goal that society as a whole would start calling for racial justice following the horrific death of George Floyd. And as utilities, I think we play a really key role in advancing DEI because we serve every customer. We have what's called a duty to serve. And energy, like water, is an essential need. And we cannot discriminate or leave anyone behind. And that's why we talk about being reliable, affordable, equitable, clean, all of these things, and of course, safe. And this becomes even more critical as we build a clean energy future, because it's vitally important to ensuring that everyone can afford it. This transition isn't without cost, and that all voices are heard and included in the transition, particularly some of those voices that weren't heard in the past, because we know that communities of color have suffered more than white communities due to pollution and other types of inequities. So we need to make sure that as we transition, they benefit at least as much, and if not more, than some of the rest of us. I'm very happy to be a female, succeeding a female. I think PSE has done terrific work on the gender front. And I'm really proud of the utility industry as a whole. It used to be very white male dominated, and now we're seeing a number of women in leadership roles and in CEO roles. I also love this region because at Seattle City Light and Tacoma Public Utilities, we also have terrific women at the helm, and we've really been able to collaborate together, particularly Deborah Smith at Seattle City Light. We have just enjoyed a really terrific relationship, and I think we're going to really be able to move the needle ahead on behalf of our customers. We've also made some changes in terms of diversity on our senior leadership team. We have the first African-American officer on the team in some time, and recently I brought on someone I had worked with at El Paso who's absolutely terrific, Adrian Rodriguez, who will be our first Latino, and he is going to serve as the SVP of Regulatory and Strategy. And like me, Adrian is new to the area, and I look forward to introducing him to all of you. So while we're making some significant steps, the risk of stating the obvious, there is still significant work to do. And some of you may be familiar with the Washington Employers for Racial Equity. And as a coalition member, PSE has signed a collective commitment that sets specific, measurable goals. Very important to have these, right? And these will address racial inequity, particularly for Black Washingtonians, given the long history of injustice and the degree of inequity experienced by African Americans. So this coalition is just one example of what we're doing. I realize it's just a starting point and that much remains to be done. And just like with climate change, there's an urgency to act. But I am 100% committed to making progress and making institutional change that can't be undone. I think that as leaders, it's really important that we not just think about our tenure, but that we put things into motion that mean there's no turning back. And so if I could have any success during whatever tenure I have at PSE, it would really be doing that both with regard to climate change and DEI. So like I said, I feel really fortunate to be living in this region. Funny story, my son, who I mentioned, who goes to the Northwest School, he was 14 when we moved. He was an 8th grader now. He's in high school, but you know, we decided not only to move here, but also to move here and live on a houseboat with 2 large dogs. And so it has been quite an adventure for us. And I'm just so pleased to be here because we have a strong foundation in Washington with some of the most innovative companies and people in the world. And we've also, through this crisis, built a really powerful network of regional leaders. The ways that we've come together as a region to deal with the COVID crisis and to really, as I said, put aside differences, work in an environment of trust and of listening. Listening is going to be really important in all of this. I'm hoping we can apply that to climate change as well. So really excited to be here. And, you know, with Rabbi Wiener, when he talked about being stewards and guardians, I thought, that's what I came here to do. And I hope that all of you will join me in that. And thank you again for the opportunity to talk to you today. Happy to take any questions.
Oh, Mary, there are so many questions. It's incredible. Thank you so much. Awesome chat. Really appreciate it. We have more questions than I think we can do in the time. So are you ready for like just a whole bunch of just like quick, rapid questions and answers?
Yes, I'm not an especially fast thinker, but I'll do my best.
Great. Well, this will be even more fun to watch. I got 2 questions to start with from the same person. Question 1, thoughts that you can share publicly on Seattle's recent ban on natural gas in new buildings. 1. 2, does PSE have a strategy for acquiring, selling renewable natural gas?
Yeah, and I'm happy to talk about both of those. First, I want to make one comment that I tell my team, and I sometimes say to myself out loud too. As a utility, we don't make public policy. We seek to influence it, and we comply with it. So whatever Seattle has decided to do, obviously, we will comply with it. I think you heard me speak a little bit about the resource adequacy issue that we're experiencing here in the region. And I think it's going to be compounded by the fact that this region will grow exponentially over the next, decade or so. So we're going to have even greater energy needs. We're also hearing more and more talk about taking down the dams, right? We're talking about the need for fish health and maybe ending some of these hydro facilities. And then we're moving to renewables. And the way that renewables largely work is we have to go to where they are and bring them to us. And so when you look at the solar availability and when you look at the good wind resources, they happen to largely be on the other side of the Cascades. So that probably means we'll have to take out all the stops, which is we'll have to do extreme energy efficiency, which I'm a huge fan of. And PSE is actually one of the earliest and best national leaders in that. We'll have to look at the distribution grid. So we'll have to look at customer-sided resources and pull out all the stops there. We'll have to look at demand response and incenting certain time of use rates. And then adding to that electric vehicles, right? That's gonna up the load too. So I'm concerned about kind of foreclosing the possibility for us to find a clean use for our pipes. I really do believe, and I wasn't always a believer in hydrogen, but what we've seen develop over the last year or so, including a Scottish utility that actually is doing a project where a town is being served by hydrogen, I think that we're going to see success there. So I respect the city of Seattle. We will comply with what they do, but I would just say, let's look at energy holistically and let's not pick winners and losers too quickly. because I think that there are some things that will exist in the future that don't exist now. And by the future, I mean relatively quickly. I think that hydrogen probably will be available broadly and commercially by about 2027. So that's what I'm hoping for, but respect what they do. And in terms of RNG, renewable natural gas, one of the issues right now is there just isn't enough of it. And we have procured quite a bit of it, most recently through a project with the Klickitat PUD. And very, very excited about that. And we actually have a voluntary program where we blend renewable natural gas for customers who want that. I live in Seattle and I'm a member of that program and I really like it. But we're going to have to find ways to get this RNG from its locations to where we can put it in pipelines to make it, to get more of it. And so I think that's going to be really important as we move ahead too.
All right. As an EV owner, I like this next question a lot. The Washington legislature is considering requiring only electric vehicles to be sold by 2030. If we move that quickly to EV, would PSE be able to provide adequate electricity to accommodate the fast change in electric vehicles?
We will, because as utilities, we are nothing if not planners. But I would mention again, kind of with the electrification of vehicles, like I talked about a moment ago, the growing region, the talk about, taking down some of the dams, the talks about limiting natural gas. We need to think this through. We need to collectively think it through and make sure we can do it. But PSE will always do its very best. And we've never come up with a situation where we weren't able to supply energy to our customers. And I certainly don't plan to have that happen on my watch. So we'll do our best.
All right.
What type of EV do you have?
I have a plug-in EV Ford Fusion.
And
right now I'm getting about 121 miles a gallon.
That's amazing.
And
that's what we need is we need to have the charging infrastructure so that people feel comfortable taking their EVs everywhere. And PSE has actually been part of a program to have charging infrastructure built up and down the West Coast, and excited about that. All right. I want the Audi e-tron. I would love to have that.
Yeah, the new one they released today. This car upsets my my big fat F-150, just so that we're super realistic. All right, next question. And you kind of touched on this in your presentation. What are some of PSE's DEI, that's a lot of acronyms, initiatives around hiring, and what kind of progress are you making?
So we are not making nearly as much progress as I want to make. I mentioned the coalition that we're in. We're also in the process of developing our DEI playbook that will be released at the end of the first quarter. There are a few initiatives that I would say will be part of that. A few of them are related to current employees and allowing people to bring their whole selves to work. There's a lot of discussion, especially with African American employees, that because of stereotypes about them and assumptions that people make about them, they often feel they have to behave in ways that aren't consistent with who they actually are. So one is allow people to bring themselves to work. One of the most important ones for me, though, is having people of color all the way to the top ranks of the company. I mentioned that we've made some progress on the officer level. That said, our board is still all comprised of white people. And I think that needs to change. And I've been pressing that with the board very candidly. Another key issue is, where do we recruit? How do we recruit? How do we reach out to some of these communities who haven't traditionally been aware of the types of jobs that we have? And then how do we create a pipeline, an equitable pipeline? Something else we do at PSE, and I think probably many of you do it as well, is unconscious bias training. It applies in how we interact with people. It applies in how we review resumes. It applies in how we interpret certain behaviors. And so I think, holistically, all of these things will help us get there. But it's very important to me that we get this playbook in place, because as we talked about earlier, we have to have metrics and they have to be measurable to make sure that programs stay in place and outlast all of us.
All right. I got a text on the next one that the person that's going to ask this is kind of really worried about the question itself. So that's kind of funny. I acknowledge the need for clean energy and pollution mitigation, but the light pollution, the visual pollution, and the noise pollution, along with the negative impact of adjacent land values caused by wind power, is ignored by urbanites. How will PSE reconcile this?
That is a really interesting question, and one that I'm glad you raised because I haven't given a lot of thought to it, and one that I'm going to give more thought to because I actually grew up in southern New Mexico on a ranch in a very, very rural area. And one of the things that I most loved about it was the night skies. And that's something that I miss living in a city. As with all of these things, it seems there is no perfect solution, right? I mean, the bird kill from wind turbines, although I understand now painting them black tends to help with that. But the light issues, you know, for aircraft and otherwise are going to be an issue. I think really it goes back to having these honest conversations about what trade-offs. To me, dealing with climate change is the most important issue we have. I hope we reach a point where we have small nuclear. I realize some people aren't a huge fan of that, but I'm a huge believer in some of the small nuclear technology that's being developed and some of these other solutions so that maybe we don't need to rely as heavily on wind, or maybe we find ways to mitigate the impacts as we go ahead. But I think short answer is important question, but probably right now wouldn't dissuade me from trying to do everything I can to replace fossil generation with wind, solar, and otherwise.
All right. See, all questions are good questions.
They are.
Does PSE see potential to expand your portfolio to use emerging technologies to bring new services to your customers, such as broadband and other new services?
You know, we talk about that sometimes, and we haven't really come to ground on that. The new services that we definitely want to bring to our customers are those more around what our traditional competencies are, and whether these are beyond the meter services in terms of storage, whether they're assisting customers with charging, these types of things. Those are the things that we're really focused on. Or if customers want additional green energy, you know, prior to our entire portfolio going green by 2045, people want to do it faster. Those are the kinds of things we want to do. I think work around buildings as well is something that we talk about. I mean, there's some really terrific people here like McKinstry and others working on these things. And how do we partner with our customers to help them on the energy efficiency as well? Because a kilowatt hour that you don't have to generate or gas that you don't have to use to heat is certainly better than having to find a way to procure it, whether it's with wind or otherwise.
Okay, I'm going to try and put two of these questions together. Let's see how clever I am. What is renewable gas? And the other question is, I once thought that maybe this is the same thing. God, I hope so. I once thought that natural gas was a clean energy source. Recently, I'm under the impression that it isn't so clean. Just how dirty is natural gas? That seems like good bookend questions.
Yeah, what was I couldn't hear the part about renewable natural gas.
The first one is, what is it?
So it's basically gas that comes from landfills, right? So here's a tip for all of you who are interested in stopping climate change. Food waste is one of the biggest contributors to climate change. And so try not to waste food. And, you know, because when you throw it into, well, not only the production, but then when you throw it into the landfills, it creates methane, which is a much more potent greenhouse gas than, you know, even carbon dioxide. And so we need to be able to take that methane that's going somewhere anyway and actually use it for purposes of heating and things like that. Put it into our natural gas system. So that's renewable natural gas. And the second question was our plans.
Is it truly clean?
So natural gas. Natural gas is carbon-based. So it's not 100% clean. It's not nuclear. It's not hydro. It's not solar. One of the things or it's not wind. One of the things that I like about natural gas is it's dispatchable, right? We can turn it on and off when we need it. And it's much, much cleaner than coal. Years ago, when I was at El Paso Electric, we made a decision to exit coal when it wasn't the law. We decided it's what our customers wanted, And we also thought that we could cost justify it, which turned out to be the case. But I was talking to the Sierra Club during that time, and we actually became friends. It doesn't mean they won't attack the work I do at PSC now and again, but we were talking about, you know, why we all need to move beyond coal. I agreed with it. We were talking about the need to deal with climate change, but they made very clear that they were going to come after natural gas next because it does generate carbon. And so my view on that is it's just like everything else. Let's look at the systems holistically. Let's look at what is actually going to get us there the fastest and not leave anybody behind. Because some of the technologies that I'm talking about that are developing technologies can be very expensive. They can be technologies that, especially for our economically disadvantaged customers, can mean that it's going to be difficult for them to heat their homes. So not only do we need technologies to develop, we also need them to become cost effective. And so until then, I believe in using natural gas, but it is a fossil fuel. Much better than oil, much better than coal, but it is a fossil fuel.
Awesome. Great way to end. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.